Reverend, please stand. The Reverend is here. life, health, and strength for the promises of a brand new year. We ask, Lord, that as we move into this new year, that your grace and your mercy shower down upon us. And that as we move through this year, we ask that you might sensitize and give us tidbits of grace as this city continues to expand. To all of those persons who give of themselves, we simply say thank you. For it's in your name we pray. Amen.
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 First part, we're starting with the fiscal year 2019-20 budget workshop, and our first item is Office of Economic Development Initiatives. Mr. Ryan Coleman, Director of Economic Development.
Good afternoon, Council. As y'all are preparing to go into the budget discussion for the upcoming year, we just wanted to come in and kind of give y'all an update on the Office of Economic Development, a couple of things that we've working on over the past few years, looking back at the strategic plan we did in 2013 to kind of where we are currently, and discuss some of the initiatives we're trying to work on going forward. We wanted to frame that discussion for y'all as y'all get ready to go into your retreat. We expect to have, some input from y'all as far as maybe some new ideas or directions you'd like for us to take economic development in over the next year or so. Starting off the first slide, our last strategic plan was in 2013. Mark Williams with Strategic Development Group, who's a local site selection consultant, helped us put this together. Pretty beefy document. We got input from 50 people across the community and came up with a list of 16 recommendations that you'll see here, and that's included in your sheet as well. It's a pretty broad and general strategic plan at the time, so many of the things that you will see in there are kind of just some fundamental underlying goals to be completed, such as adopting a vision statement and goals, implementing organizational structure, hiring a new director, which my predecessor, Jim Gambrell, was getting ready to retire at the time. And then, other things such as implementing communications campaign, incentive policy, and developing a site and building inventory. So if there's anything on there in particular y'all would like me to dig into, I'd be glad to kind of give you an update on that. Most of those things were completed. Some of those are probably at a point to where we need to refresh them, and some things are just going to be continuously ongoing. I think we will always be in a position where we're going to work to promote the city's strengths and mitigate its weaknesses. Aligning resources of our department with Richland County, with our partner organizations, those are things that are going to be done consistently from year to year. The next to last one, the address the homeless issue at the core of the city, that was included in our strategic plan as well. I understand the basis for that. That's kind of a little outside of our core mission for what we're trying to do as an office, and so that's the one thing on there I don't think we ever really delved into very much. So, and yes, sir.
Under that last point, I think about the homeless, and what we've done. Is there any way that there's going to be some collaboration with other folks to help further develop that particular point? Are we going to do it in-house or out of house? Because I think you know as well as everybody else knows, there is that growing population.
Mm-hmm.
How do we face that? Is it collaborative? Do we take it off of this and let others do it? Because at some point we've got to do something.
Yeah. I don't know. That's pretty far outside of the element of what we do, and I think that kind of got looped in because of the creating job opportunities.
I think what Ryan is saying, it's really shouldn't be part of economic development strategic plan. doesn't mean we're not addressing it in
It's a
community
citywide.
development and other departments, but.
So do we
for
take it
his-
off?
Well, it was
Yes,
in
I
the
think we
original study from 2013. That's why it's still listed out there. It's still something I think every department has an eye on as we go through the upcoming year's budget. There'll be discussions, and I was looking, Missy Kaufman isn't here right now, but Missy's been involved greatly with our efforts with homeless, and every department may have some piece in part of it. But it was in the original study because the effect of homelessness does have an effect on our economic development here in the community. So it's not to say Ryan isn't involved in it, it's just that he's not gonna be probably our lead charge. So that'll be more of what we address citywide with other areas of the city.
I would hope that we do that, because the population, of course, is becoming voluminous. And if we don't do something, I think we're gonna find ourselves in a quagmire, as it relates to economic development. Is it that we put together, and I'm sure this is for another conversation, put together a program where you hire folks? There's a program that's a part of, I think it's in New Jersey, where homeless folk are put to work. They are triaged, and then they are put to work, or given something to do. But that's another conversation, but it's certainly going to interest me to see what we do with that piece, and whether or not this homeless piece is a part of this. I would certainly say let's take it off, and we form something that's going to be comprehensive in nature.
Mhm.
What are you thinking, Reverend? I mean, you just said we need to do more for homeless. I'm just curious what you mean.
I'm not sure, Daniel.
Just
and the
because I
reason-
think one of the things that stumbles me in this conversation all the time is that we have all these resources here. There's lots of organizations, money, this and that, and we continue to not see a reduction. We're unable to deal with the folks who are chronic because we can't make them do anything. So when I hear that, I want to I don't think that the city needs to be more involved here until the folks who are in charge and who have the funding and everything can provide us results and that. So that's why I was curious what your thought
Daniel,
was.
that's where I'm going with that.
I think obviously probably being community development, economic development, I think there ought to be a much more robust discussion. We have them regularly. I have them with the chief and with Missy and every once in with several of you individually. I think we need to reassess every few years exactly how our funds are being spent strategically, how federal funds that we're directing, which of our partners are performing the best, which are not. And also just looking at the macro and the micro issues that folks are dealing with. I mean, not only, I believe, although the point in time count may not say the same thing, I think the population has grown, but I think that it's grown because of different issues that it might have 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago, everything from opioids to wage issues, to any range of issues. We're seeing a significant number of people have mental health challenges on the street. So it requires us to reassess, and maybe tonight, maybe just we might entertain a motion to go ahead and send it to committee just to have a roundup to talk about it more.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yes,
Daniel,
sir.
I think
I know.
based on nothing specific in terms of right now, but I think there is a tremendous need for us to collaborate with other folk who are doing some of that same kind of work. I don't know what our participation would be, but I do know that it's affecting our city. And it's
But we got to be willing
and we
to push.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And pushing simply means we bring in the investors. We bring them in. Let's have a round table. Let's talk about what we can do. I mean, CPD a part of it. I mean, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
So I would think that while you've got this here, it would certainly seem to me that we take that off and we send it into a group of folk who are going to collaborate and talk about it. discuss this issue.
And I'll tell you, everyone, everywhere is dealing with the same challenge.
That's right.
So it's just real across the country, maybe across the globe, but certainly across the country. Let's just take it up as a discussion matter, send it to committee tonight, and it's about time to have a more robust discussion.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Moving outside of the work that was done in the office's strategic plan, some other things that we take into consideration are some of the objectives from City Council's work plan that y'all put together a few years ago. There were some goals around, economic development, about recruiting insurance technology and office-type companies to the area. And so, we use these as the basis of some of the work that we've done as well. The strategic plan to identify funding and strategies and incentives, these are things that we have just started to incorporate in our office within the past year. We will continue to work to try to grow those resources and provide, other opportunities to assist with business development. Strategies for state and federal funding. I was just in here a few weeks ago. We talked about the Opportunity Zone program. That's could be something that we're planning to use a lot here. Still a lot of discussions going about how do we connect those developers, investors. Within the last year, the state has also done some things with regards to the use of certain tax credits to be applied towards office tenants. So now if you're trying to do, corporate type recruitment with an office tenant, if they meet some of the state's criteria, you can now use incentives to help them pay for some of those office leases. And we've used that over at Bull Street. Here most recently, that was kind of a pilot case. So we look to try to expand those resources as well. It can't be just things that the city needs to bring to the table. We need to find other assets that we can kind of layer to try to help recruit business. Financial support for master plans and the work with small women, minority-owned businesses as well. And then goal 4, which is a little more on the peripheral of what we do, is working to implement plans to address affordable workforce housing. We have talked about using some of the student housing program funding, to maybe help address some of the affordable workforce housing issues. And then targeted community development, redevelopment projects, with the work in the Opportunity Zone and a lot of the Eau Claire area that will influence. I think the OZ discussions will be a much larger component of how we help address and drive more development north of Elmwood. Okay, a list of notable projects that we've worked on since 2014, starting with things such as the Siebel's expansion.
Can you tell us what role your office played in each one of these deals?
Okay. With Siebel's expansion, we worked for the update on the multi-county industrial park designation, preparing that and bringing it to council. Siebel's has some parking challenges over there as well, so we've worked with the planning and development staff to try to help them out with some landscape and layout issues that they have. They kind of tried to squeeze every little last bit of parking that they can off of the site. And so that was kind of, one of the technical things that we dealt with planning and development. Dominion, working with them to get the multi-county industrial park and the tax credit as well as helping them identify a location. They went to a former, I guess it was a Bank of America processing facility off of Moore Hopkins Lane over off of Greystone. And so we met with them several times on the front end as they were looking for locations to move here in the city of Columbia or Richland County. Jushi's ongoing, and a lot of that continues to be around, possible rate structures and a lot of impact fee discussions that are still ongoing right now, as well as helping them, get some of their permits to operate. And when you have parties such as DHEC and our utilities department and the county involved, it gets a little hairy when you're trying to kind of work between those. We worked with Sam Magookin when he owned T-Cube, when he was still in the incubator. We actually had the Capgemini folks come in from out of town before they acquired that company. And so we hosted them in our office and, did some presentations for them on the city of Columbia, as well as working coordinating with them and the State Department of Commerce on some of their tax credits. Capgemini expansion, that was,
Juicy deal, is the estimated root revenue from water and sewer still 1.4 million?
We'll have to take a look. We'll get back on that. The initial might have actually been higher. The numbers have changed and come down some.
Because I know they didn't build out in the beginning.
Yeah, those weren't going to be as high, but we'll go and follow up and see what that looks like.
Capgemini expansion, kind of that continued after the acquisition, and so we started meeting with them back in February of 2017 up until their most current announcement and opening of the Security Operations Center on Bull Street. And again, there was involvement with the state, Richland County, and the city on incentives for that as well.
And those investments that you're showing here, are those the tax credits that they received that they reinvested, or is
No,
that
that's
outside money?
That's the money that the company put into the investment. So
Because I know that they got about 1.5 million that they got in tax credits that they basically passed on to do the build out for their office, so it's kind of a net gain. Did they invest anything outside of that?
no.
Okay. I'm just trying to, I want to understand what our role is and then how that plays in the future and how much investment we've had in our community, because obviously growth is a real concern of mine, and continues to be. And so I'm just trying to understand what numbers and what we have done.
And some of these we participated in. Well, probably specifically the Capgemini expansion. I think most of these other ones were, well, aside from putting in a multi-county industrial park and the 50% tax credit deduction there. Right Dose Corporation just announced a facility, or just had a ribbon cutting on that a month ago. Actually, that's out at the Millens Tech Enterprise campus at the Northeast. And that's a distribution facility. There were some site issues. There was a mixed-use plan that was done for that site maybe a decade ago, and there was a lot of work that kind of had to go into unwinding some of our planning requirements and to allow them to do some of the more industrial-type developments out there. So specifically, there was some road and sidewalk issues we had to help address with planning and development as well. And then the 5 student housing projects. So some upcoming recruitment trips that we are looking at next month, actually, planning to take a trip to the Northeast, to the Connecticut, Boston, New York area to do something probably specifically oriented towards insurance technology and services. Following that, there's the International Council of Shopping Centers. They have a Carolinas conference in Charlotte. I'm going to have a staff member attend that as well, looking at the possibility of trying to bring some more retail to the area. Shared Services and Outsourcing Week, which is going to be your back office professional service type jobs. That will be in March as well. Recon is the largest retail conference that's put on in the U.S., and that will be in May. We'll attend that. And then the Bio Show will be in Philadelphia in June. That's life sciences, biotechnology. And so that's another area we're looking at recruiting as well to, I guess, work in partnership with Midlands Tech and grow the enterprise campus.
Yes, ma'am, please.
So Ryan, let me ask, so I know, like, I don't know if it's the Recon or Carolinas or both, but I know, like, sometimes Felicia and Michael go to those. When y'all go to those conferences and we have multiple people, are y'all working collectively to to sell the city in general?
Yeah, I went with them 2 years ago, maybe, and you know, a conference like that is so big and so many days long. You'll normally kind of group up and talk to people, and then kind of split off on your own. I mean, it's Recon's just too big for one person to cover on their own anyway. So, we usually coordinate and meet up, and then everybody will kind of
I
disperse.
just want to
through
make
the
sure
day.
you're coordinating. And just, if people come to the city, it's great, whether they go to North Main or, downtown. But if we've got different people there, I just want to make sure that there's that coordination of
Sure.
splitting up is great, but that ultimately we want people to be opened up to the city.
Yes, ma'am.
I think we should be going to these events, having sat down with some of the major recruiters and understanding the opportunities that are out there and what fits here and understanding. Because for the next 12 months, my focus is going to be really pushing us to recruit retail, restaurant, and fill our areas from, look, if 5 Points flushes, the majority of the city goes. And so we need to be able to strategically push the retail aspects that help all parts of our city grow. But 5 Points is the one area that everybody knows. And so people use that as a gauge when they're looking at other areas and everything. So I think we need to be focused with a plan. I think we need to see what sectors are growing, what type of retail and this fits our secondary market.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we ought to go in there with a full package. I think we ought to take advantage of all these smart people that we have live in our community. I mean, you got a sauna over there on Gervais Street who's headquartered here that has, it's a $2 billion real estate company. We ought to be sitting down with their recruiting team and say, guys, give us some guidance. When you go to this event, who's out there, who should we be targeting, who's aggressively growing, who fits the needs in a university town? I mean, this is what they do day in and day out. I think we got to focus when we go to these meetings because we're stumbling.
Well, I think, just
Period.
one point, just to follow up on that. And, yeah, I know the group has gone to those conferences every year. I'm not sure, but I think in moving forward, it would be good if we take with us an actual profile of the city. If you're talking about what areas are really pushing retail, high-tech technology, whatever, I think you have that kind of information you can put on the table and say, this is where we are, this is how we're proceeding, and this is how we can accommodate you, if,
We need a recruitment package.
Yeah, and not just about what the university has. I think the university kind of fends for themselves when they're looking for locations. But I think that's another way we can sell this city.
Right, Ryan, I mean, what I think would be very helpful, obviously, you have some collaterals, you actually shared some details with me earlier today. I think sitting down with the committee, the Economic Community Development Committee, to start off with, who is that committee? Who is that? Is that you?
Yeah, but we can combine that with.
And who else? Is it three of you? Whoever else. Starting there, collaterals, strategy. Let's look at the folks who we have. I mean, Terry Brown and crew at Asana, they've done great work back when they were still at Eden's. But they are pros. But spending some time focusing on a very specific strategy, as we've talked about with insurance and insurance tech, that you're probably going to touch on at some point as well. If you don't, you may want to touch on that as well. And let's just focus like a laser beam. I think at some point we need to make sure. I'm not sure if we have a specific discussion already scheduled on opportunity zones. And then we got next month. We're going to do something in the community, but updating folks. We had a meeting with McKinsey last week to talk about them playing a role in helping us hone our opportunity zone strategy, which is going to be decidedly more North Columbia, Richland County portion around Columbia Mall and also all of West Columbia is an opportunity zone. But yes, articulating a very specific strategy, and I think one thing that's clear, I think there's a passion around the room, whether it's be for the entire city or different parts of the city or different areas in which there's some expertise. I think finding ways to pull council and have council help buttress your efforts. If it's selling different parts of the city, is selling different aspects of economic development and getting us all singing from the same hymnal and maybe even going on some of these trips with you. But I think Daniel's right about, I think, not just a focused strategy, but also, obviously, just as you deal with recruiters regularly, making sure when you go to these meetings, you know exactly who you're going to go see, and you're working on what's been an established strategy and relationship. So, but my sense is there's a lot of interest in the room to get involved. I mean, so full strategy.
We have to.
Sure.
I agree. I agree.
We're on the back end of the biggest economic boom in the country.
Yeah,
and we're the ones not growing.
Yeah,
We got to jump on it.
But that's not true, Daniel. I mean,
It is
that's
true.
not true. I mean, over the course of that economic boom from here to Gervais Street, retail development, fintech development.
Just add up the.
Even
Let's take the numbers and
no,
let's
but-
talk
but-
about
but-
it.
Let me finish. But if it's Samsung or IBM, we have IBM's not only the data analytics but the IoT North American headquarters here in the city, because we help facilitate that happening with USC and Blue Cross. I mean, so there are things happening. Everything's not defined by whether or not there's a crane, and we're working together to determine exactly how we address that, and I think, and hopefully we can get Richard County to come along with us. We still have some larger issues as it relates to our taxing DNA that create some real challenges, major challenges that I think as a council we've addressed. We got to get everybody else on board, from the county and the school district, and obviously more importantly the state. On board to help address the issues that are unique. I mean, the packet that we got from John Fellows, if you guys haven't had a chance to review the comprehensive plan of Columbia Compass documents, showed that 76.5% of the real estate in the city is now on the tax rolls. I mean something I know is important to you all that Mo and those that have been talking about for a while. I mean, it's a major issue. But to say there's been no growth or no business development, we have had some. It's not what we want to see. And certainly, I don't think what is yet to come, and hopefully issues outside of our control don't screw up the economy going forward. But I would love for whatever the strategy is going forward to fully employ all of us in its execution.
Mhm.
In its execution. And I just think that's important. But we got major challenges we got to address, no doubt about that. But I think we're going to have to figure out how to do them.
We have to focus on it, and we've spent over the last decade a tremendous amount of money supporting groups who supposedly are bringing investment in return, and we've chased a lot of rabbits, and we got to focus on. And I would encourage everybody to ride around and look at all the empty retail and spaces that are out there in our community. We need to address it. We have a great community, but we got to sell it. And, I think we're in a prime position to take advantage of frankly, the mayor being in his position. And we need to do it while we have the national spotlight, because it's not going to get any better. I mean, it's time for brass tacks, and I think we gotta hold folks accountable for it. I think we need to have results and goals. We can't achieve it. I mean, if you look at the last 5 years of what we've had come in, I mean, you're talking about less than $80 million worth of investment. If you make it glorified look, it's not good.
I think one additional thing that we have done for the first time in my 12 years with the City of Columbia is we engaged a lead generation consultant for the first time this past year to help us go out, help structuring our own trips, start pre-qualifying businesses so that, you know, generally when you're going out and you're going on a recruitment trip, you may be tagging along with the Department of Commerce or the county or Central SC Alliance. So you're usually kind of riding along with something that somebody else has structured and it fits and suits their purposes. We're going to be doing our own trips this year, and they'll be targeted towards the things that this city council is interested in, so that we know that when we're going somewhere, we're meeting with companies that A, have an expansion plan, that B, are of the type of industry that we are looking to bring here, and C, you know, have some knowledge and understanding of Columbia and have already expressed some interest. So I think the ability to go from kind of just riding along to actually being more in the driver's seat of how we're approaching people and trying to bring them into the city will be really beneficial as well.
We need to start off killing squirrels and rabbits and worry about elephants later. I mean, just
And
reality.
that's what, you know, we're not going out there to sell something that we don't have. But if I've got 20,000 square feet of office space in a building down here on Main Street, that's what we want to sell. You know, we're not trying to go after something that's.
Quality of life is why everybody's moving to the southeast. It's the only place that's had growth over the last decade at an average of 6 point whatever percentage it is, and it's because of quality of life. So as we continue to fill restaurants and retail and fix our streets and make it safe and do all the things that we need to do, we're going to get those folks here. But we don't have that infrastructure yet. We're still pushing people out. Our tax structure is something we've all discussed that we're going to have to figure out. We're going to have to bring our partners in. I mean, and that means the school board, that means the state and other folks. I mean, we're not even competitive in our own state. We're only 3.8 million people. So, I mean, to me, this is our crucial year. If we don't grab the bull by the horns in this next 12 months period, we're going to miss some opportunities.
Since we're brainstorming here, I'm just curious to, when we talk about retail, been in the retail spaces, actually, you know, the e-commerce is affecting a lot of the physical brick and mortar retail places all over the country, just not here. So what ideas are you looking at when you say improve or go after retail spots or retail to come in and fill in our retail spots?
We're just starting to kind of scratch the surface on that. You know, retail is something we've reacted to in the past. Okay. Retail restaurant is probably something we've responded to in the past. So if somebody were to call into the office and say, hey, we're interested in doing a store in your city, I need 2,000 square feet of retail space, where should I go? And then we would generally kind of help them out. Here's a couple spots that fit your profile based on what you told us. You know, we'll connect you with the folks that represent that.
But I
This
think
is-
that's what Daniel, I'm not trying to put words in Daniel's mouth, but I think the idea is, since we're going after with recruiting businesses, I don't think we need to wait for somebody to call us and say.
Well, no, and
"Look, I mean, you know, we need to kind of think outside the box on what retail place we want to go and go after them and ask them if that's the market that their product fit in. And I think
yeah, and that's what we're in the process. We're kind of in discovery process right now. So within the past month, we've sat in through a couple ICSC webinars. We've met with 5 out of the 6 heads of the business associations, talking with them about the character profiles of their individual districts. What are the types of problems you're having individually? Looking for some issues that, you know, maybe if we addressed as the city could help out several districts, you know, whether it's issues with zoning or property owners or parking, and working to identify what those empty spaces are. And we've got a running Excel sheet right now. Bree and Sergio have been going out the past few weeks, riding around, getting property information as well. So, I mean, we're starting to dig into that, and we look to get out in front of that pretty soon. Other initiatives, the opportunity zones, we came in here and spoke about that with y'all a few weeks ago. Bloomberg Economic Development Collaboration Program is something we are working on along with Richland County, the Department of Commerce, the Chamber, and the Midlands Business Leadership Group to help, I guess, streamline and create some collaboration between those entities, particularly when it comes to trying to help bring industries to the area. We realize everybody gets busy every now and then, and it's a little easy to kind of get focused in your silo. And so that is something that we're working on through the Bloomberg
There's
Group.
needs from all those groups who are participating in the Bloomberg Leadership Program to be in New York next week.
Yes, sir.
Next week, working together on regional economic development collaboration. So,
Mhm.
I'm there now.
We've done a Salesforce implementation and are finishing the closeout on that. So we've loaded all of our contacts and are starting to work through that program to help drive tracking metrics and projects and essentially creating that pipeline of how do we identify a lead and interest and then walk them through and close that. We've looking at a potential open source conference here in April that will be information technology focused. And then we're participating in the community comparative analysis that council has been talking about working, figuring out, our tax issues and our non-taxable properties. And so I think there's some discussions about who do we engage to do that study. This past year, in January 2018, we started for the first time doing a small incentive program out of our office. The total amount of that program currently is only about $200,000. And that is something that we have leveraged to try to either help recruit office or business projects to the city or even identify, high impact local type businesses that we think have some growth potential and hopefully, help them, grow themselves or introduce some types of programs that we think will benefit the community. And so, we did that with Capgemini on their expansion, and then Sarah Simmons was also a participant in that as well. And we're still looking to identify more businesses out there that we can continue to move into that program. Right now, there's only the $200,000. Mass General, their interest will roll out of our budget, and so if we don't do anything else, we think we can increase that by another $50,000 to $75,000 within the next year. So just trying to get a little pool of money going together and put that back into business development in the community.
Ryan, is that program targeted to a specific geographical area or who can participate?
No, ma'am, it's citywide.
I want to say one more thing too, and I want to apologize for stepping out. That was Senator Scott calling back, Tim Scott, not John Scott. I called earlier just asking about what more we could do locally to help push things along in Washington, D.C. He shared his insights. I'll share them with you all individually. But we're going to start seeing the pinch of the federal shutdown locally very soon if something's not resolved in Washington, D.C. Again, because I'm going to have to step out at 3:45, and I'll be back about 4:30. But I did want to, again, touch base on something that Daniel and Mo said. I do believe that our sweet spot is by focusing on a very hyper-local strategy. The things that can't be Amazoned in, although it seems like everything can be Amazoned in. The things that can't be Amazoned in that are unique and local to Columbia, focusing on the strategy to fill. Yeah, the towers. It's authentically local, things that we can support, because I think what you'll see is that the success that we have seen over the last several years have been very direct local approaches. If it's using CDBG funding, whether it's in housing in Gloria's area, I still put our affordable housing loan program up against anyone anywhere else, or CDBG funds on facade renovation to encourage lessors or lessees to do certain things. But I think a very focused retail recruitment strategy is going to be necessary. And I'm not sure if you're going to attract national credit tenants or if it's going to be something that's uniquely local or
Regional.
or regional, or with a focus, people who are doing business in Charlotte, Charleston, Augusta, or whatever it happens to be. But that is going to be our sweet spot. And some of the macro issues most talking about. I mean, I'm not sure about you all, but every other day in December, I came home and Santa Claus was on my doorstep again. My wife ordered something via Amazon or UPS, and we got to find ways to, again, make sure we find as many ways possible to shop.
And I think that's something we need to discuss maybe next week and during the retreat, into what our next steps is, and, whether we're looking at, small business, business license fee waiver, whether we do other incentives to bring small businesses in here. But you're right, specialty shops is the key for the future. But the big shops, we're famous for the rivers, we're famous for hunting, we're famous for fishing. I mean, we need to go after the Bass Pro and the Cabela's and all, because there is enough natural resources for customers to utilize that shop, and also to bring more people into the area, rather than, I'm guilty of that more than anybody else maybe on this table, but I take my boys to go to Cabela's, to Rock Hill often. Often. I love to have one somewhere around here that I don't have to go there, because we like fishing and we like, doing other stuff outside. So I think that's something that we want you guys to think outside the box and go after, and see if we can recruit some of these businesses.
But I wanna piggyback on something you said there.
Yes, sir.
And I think all of us are very, very concerned about the elephant. We're concerned about the elephant getting out of the room and bigger and larger things. Right now, we've got squirrels and rabbits. And I think, if I understand this conversation, I think that's gonna be a stepping stone to getting that elephant out of the room and involving ourselves in larger kinds of things. It's not that the elephant don't want to move. Sometimes it takes a 2x4 for the elephant to get out of the room.
I was referring to hunting elephants. not trying to get them out of the room, but I like where you're going.
Context is everything. I must have stepped out when you were talking about the elephant.
I said we need to quit chasing elephants.
I was trying to think of what the world's going on here.
He said stop
Kill
chasing.
squirrels and chase
Okay.
rabbits.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think to kill some squirrels, and some rabbits, sometimes may be good. But I think, and I'm with you, man, I'd like to see the elephant make its footprint in this city of ours. And that's how I'm looking at the elephant being the larger job, the larger things. But I'm also interested in the rabbits and the squirrels and the pheasant and all those little things that takes place in the life of our city.
And that's where we have to go.
And
And that was my point earlier,
yeah.
is we got to quit chasing the elephants. But the reality is the things that we can do today is we talked about this several weeks ago. Drive into our major areas. Go across the Blossom Street Bridge. You got grass standing up in the medians and on the side of the road. It looks horrible. We got that picture from the post office. That's what people see when they go to Findlay Park. And you come in on 26, you got a big pile of rocks, sitting there into the gateway of the city. Or you come down Two Notch Road, or come down Trentham Road Extension off 77. You got a brand new school there, and there's 6-foot grass weeds growing up all around it on the sidewalks in the street. That's what people see. If we don't have pride in our
Right.
city, who the hell's going to come here and invest?
Part of it all boils down to one or two things. What we want to do, we can't do ourselves. And you're right. We have to understand what's clicking and what is attractive, and who are attracting the kind of businesses that we want to see come to Columbia. Part of that too is, and I agree with you. What do you see? We're going out and we're sending staff out to do recruitment. But I don't know that. Well, what I try to do is I try and ask folks What do you want to see?
Can I get an amen,
Yeah,
Reverend?
A ringtone competition
Come
for us
on
all
now.
over.
Is this when we pass the offering
I
plate?
like my backup. But, you know, it's just like, if we want to target parts of the city, we have visions of what we'd like to see it look like. Question is, does our vision always equate with those people in that area would like to see? I mean, they tell you what they'd like to see. We may not be able to deliver on everything, but there are people moving into certain parts of the city that have enjoyed certain kinds of quality of life elsewhere, and they're here, and you got to give them the same thing, or they will leave. They won't stay. Entrances to just certain parts of the city, you're right. They need to look.
We have Robert Anderson's put before us a gateway improvement.
Right, and we need to move on that. We honestly need to move on that. And
I came back in the room and I took everybody back off track. We're gonna get back on track, Ryan, because I want to make sure I'm here for.
Come on, Jeff, you're supposed to be running this meeting.
No. This meeting's gonna be longer than the one tonight, y'all. If y'all don't mind, I might want to move things around a little bit. We can
Talk about off track.
I know after we get Ryan, because I want to be here for the tobacco discussion, and I can catch up on the budget issue.
It's a vapor.
Just don't anybody spend any
That's a vapor.
money while I'm gone.
Vaporize it.
So Ryan, you go ahead.
Yep.
Apologize.
Partner agencies, our ED partners generally assist us with things such as, scheduling recruit initiatives, entrepreneurship, marketing, and talent retention and attraction. I think it's worth noting, we have reduced our overall partner funding budget by about $300,000. So we've cut it by 40% since 2014. We've reduced those numbers. We've cut out, some organizations such as, New Hub and initiatives that just really weren't doing anything anymore. And we'll probably reduce that by further 60,000 over next year. We did take that money and use that to start up some of this incentive funding. So we have tried to either reduce that out of the budget and make it available towards the city, or to either repatriate that and put it back to the use based on the direction we were getting from council at the time. And got a kind of a breakout here of our current partners. We fund 7 different agencies, and we also still provide some funding to the Greater Columbia Chamber of Commerce for some of their military initiatives as well. That is done through us, but I think unlike the other organizations, they're not in our budget per se. It's just one of the contracts that we manage. So I wanted to make that available for y'all and then answer any questions y'all had about that.
Ryan, on your partner funding, how do we cooperate with TN Development and Eau Claire and Fred Delk's group? How does that fit into your program of recruitment?
Well, I mean, from a funding perspective, it doesn't, but, like Fred and I have worked together, talking with hoteliers that would come to town and were interested in learning more about the city or the Vista, and, kind of tag team that, or, helping them look at locations or deal with, any of the type of questions that they have about parking or regulatory approvals or whatnot. So generally, it's kind of on a, as needed basis. I've been talking with Cecil a lot more. I know as this Opportunity Zone program spins up this year, we will have a lot more involvement in that area, and so we've been looking at potential locations for things out there as well. So it really just kind of depends, as the need necessitates, we get involved. But generally, even if we don't have something going on, we're still in communication most of the time anyway. So
To me, that seems like where we are weakest. We splinter our efforts into at least 4 different groups, all of you looking for the same type things, whether it's rabbits or squirrels or elephants. And I think we would be better served if we could centralize our economic development programs into one agency that is working together all the time rather than on an as-needed basis.
Well, you could you're headed down the right track, which we talked about years ago and nobody wanted to do. But then you could have somebody focused on restaurant retail. You have somebody focused on tech companies. You could have somebody focused on housing. You could have somebody focused on, everybody kind of. But you're right. We got 4 agencies all chasing a lot of the same thing under the disguise of economic development.
But we still fund a lot more.
Oh, yeah.
And I would like to add, for our development corporations, they aren't all just economic development, they're also community development. Some of their missions are a little different. Some of it has more focus on housing, not just economic development as well.
We did mention housing.
I'm reemphasizing that, because there's, because
Yeah.
they manage
And,
properties as well.
at the end of the day, we're doing a lot with affordable housing and this and that, but until we address the tax situation, I mean, we're still moving backwards, unfortunately. And we gotta fix that, because the one thing we don't wanna have happen is what's happening in a lot of communities, is that the folks who are doing the everyday hospitality, retail work can't afford to live where they work. We really need to include that in all of our discussions.
So that's all I've got, and I'll be reaching out to y'all. I know we'll meet with the Economic Development Subcommittee based on some of the recommendations today, but we'll try to meet with y'all individually as we are doing some more of this strategic planning for the upcoming year, just to get some of your thoughts and incorporate those into what we'll be working on.
Thank you, Ryan.
Good with us. Who becomes number
Yeah,
2?
let's do.
He wanted to go
Or
to.
do you want to go to
For the
3?
tobacco.
3.
3, okay. Item 3, tobacco policy options. Mr. Patrick Wright, Senior Assistant City Attorney.
Good afternoon. What I'll be talking about today was really 2 things: tobacco retail licensing as well as other tobacco policy options, such as the smoke-free ordinance or adjustments we may want to make. First off, tobacco retail licensing is a policy whereby government requires all stores that sell tobacco to obtain a special license for the right to sell these products for consumers. The government can impose specific performance standards and requirements as conditions of maintaining the license, and failure to meet the performance standards may result in license suspension or revocation. At its most basic level, requiring tobacco retailers to obtain a specific license to operate allows the local government to maintain an inventory of all the businesses that are selling tobacco, including the different kinds of businesses that sell tobacco and where they're located, relative to schools, youth-populated areas, and each other. Local tobacco retail licensing laws have also proven effective at reducing illegal tobacco sales to minors, helping to finance effective enforcement programs, and providing a comprehensive enforcement mechanism. Retailers generate tremendous amounts of income from the sale of tobacco products, with convenience stores generating an average of $622,248 in cigarette sales per store in 2012. And local governments can also use a variety of strategies, such as robust engagement, outreach, and education with retailers to understand their concerns. They explain the rationale for specific policies and to inform retailers about applicable laws.
You're talking Columbia, is that a local number there, 622?
I think that is, I think that's more general, not just Columbia. I think most of the numbers I have are either South Carolina specific or nationally. Tobacco use remains a significant public health problem in South Carolina and the United States generally. Each year, tobacco-related diseases cause the deaths of more than 7,200 people in South Carolina and 480,000 individuals in the U.S., making tobacco use the nation's leading cause of preventable death. It's largely undisputed that tobacco use is extremely harmful, and for decades, governments, including federal, state, as well as local levels, have advanced various policies to tackle this significant public health problem. State and local governments have developed educational and media campaigns on the risks of tobacco use, offered resources to help smokers quit, increased cigarette excise taxes, and adopted restrictions on the sale of public use of cigarettes and other tobacco products. Although tobacco use has decreased over the years, a 2014 report noted that an estimated 103,000 South Carolinians then under the age of 18 are projected to die from tobacco-related diseases. Tobacco use also has significant financial implications, including an estimated $170 billion impact on the nation's public and private health care systems. In South Carolina, the combined health care costs and productivity losses resulting from tobacco use amounts to approximately $4.25 billion annually.
That's 4.2 billion is South Carolina now?
Right, $4.25 billion annually in South Carolina.
But that's just regular tobacco, not bad.
Right, tobacco use and tobacco products. The World Health Organization estimates that by 2030, tobacco will account for 8.3 million deaths per year and will be responsible for 10% of all deaths worldwide. A 2014 Surgeon General report noted that 5.6 million Americans who were then younger than 18 were projected to die prematurely from smoke-related illness. 10% of South Carolina high school students reported smoking within the past 30 days, which is higher than the national average of 7.6%. 2,500 South Carolina residents under age 18 become new daily smokers each year.
Do we have any idea of what today's numbers are? Because the vape and stuff's been out for what, 2 years, something like that, 3 years?
Yeah, well, as far as
I mean, this is
e-cigarettes,
great, and I
right.
understand it, but the reason we're having this discussion is,
Well, it's both. This is two separate things. One is tobacco retail licensing. I'm going to get to the specific vaping part, but I will speak and say that specifically regarding e-cigarettes, it has increased between 2011 and 2015 among high school students. It's increased 900%, specifically e-cigarettes. And these products are actually now more common than the other uses of tobacco. So they're more common now than conventional tobacco products, including cigarettes, cigars, chewing tobacco, and hookahs. So e-cigarettes, actually, they've increased much more than the other tobacco products. And they do contain nicotine, which is an additive that they use, and they cause addiction and actually potential harm to developing brains of the teenagers that use them.
And Daniel, I think he's putting together, I'd ask Teresa to check on our ability to license locally, and then Howard was asking about the e-cigarettes, so since they were making a presentation, they're putting all of it together.
I'm just, trying to understand the difference in today's world.
It's a big difference.
I mean, 900%, I mean, it's a pretty significant number.
And regarding the tobacco retail licensing, research does demonstrate that local tobacco retail ordinances dramatically reduce youth access to cigarettes. For example, a study showed that the odds of daily smoking reduced by 2% for each 1% increase in merchant compliance with the youth access laws. A study in Philadelphia showed that with their laws, it decreased, sales of minors decreased from 85% to 43%.
So what happened in Philadelphia now with the vape? Did that go back up?
Well, that's the thing is vaping has gone up, but, and what I will show you is that in both these, both the tobacco retailing part as well as the smoke-free part, what we need to do is, as far as the definitions, add in the e-cigarettes, the vaping, and the tobacco alternative products. So that helps take care of that, to put restrictions on that as well as the traditional tobacco products. Also, there's a study of several Minnesota cities that found that an increased licensing fee in conjunction with strict enforcement of youth access laws led to a decrease from 39.8% to 4.9% in the number of youth availability to purchase tobacco and tobacco products. Okay. And licensing affects not just the traditional tobacco products, but also alternative nicotine products, which includes e-cigarettes. And so the licensing for the tobacco products would, with adding the e-cigarettes and the alternative, not just e-cigarettes, but alternative nicotine products, it helps reduce, and it would, now help reduce that 900% the high school students are using the vaping or e-cigarette products versus the traditional tobacco products. Also, with the licensing, we can require that sales be done on-site only. So that means that they can't deliver tobacco products or vaping products to any consumer. If someone buys it, they have to come to that store or that site to buy. So there will no delivery to those to customers.
Can you can't currently do that now, can you?
Order it.
You can't order it, can you now?
The biggest access for the youth are through mail order.
Yeah, but I guess my question is if I order it from Tennessee, how are you gonna stop me from getting it?
Make it illegal.
Right. Well, we will have, if we put it in the licensing ordinance, it would be on the books, and we can, I guess, deal with.
I mean,
how we
today, everybody
enforce
just
it.
clicks. I mean,
Some additional tobacco retail licensing restriction options are to prohibit the sale of flavored tobacco products, including menthol cigarettes, require a minimum.
boy, you're cool.
Require a minimum package size for cigars and little cigars, prohibit tobacco sales in pharmacies, prohibit tobacco coupons and discounts, require a minimum price for tobacco products, prohibit tobacco sales at restaurants and bars, prohibit tobacco sales at businesses that allow smoking, and prohibit tobacco retailers from selling drug paraphernalia.
When you
One
say-
of the,
Patrick, when you say prohibit all tobacco, is that inclusive of chewing and snuff and that sort of thing?
right, well, what it is that these licensed retailers can sell certain things, but regarding flavored tobacco products, prohibit, yes, that's
So
all
that'd be a
tobacco
bar.
products. Right,
Because there's some snuffs and some chewing tobacco that is also flavored.
right. It would be tobacco products in general, including the e-cigarettes and vaping items.
Roger, how do we deal with flavored tobacco products, cultural issues or religious issues like with those?
Well, for that, we can put exceptions in the ordinance regarding religious items or issues, and maybe even put specific places where it can be done. So that we can have certain exceptions for that type of situation.
Real religions. Real religions.
And some of the options that have been done other places, one is a buffer zone, which Chicago passed a law for buffer zones. But what that does is prohibit the sale of flavored tobacco within certain distances from schools. That's been problematic because it's expensive and time consuming, and you have to determine what is 500 feet, for example, from a school or park, and that costs money and it's labor intensive. So that one isn't recommended because it also caused dissent between owners of properties who sell these tobacco products because they dispute whether it's 500 feet or not, and then sometimes it works out that there could be a store right beside them or across the street that can do it and they can't, and so that causes issues. So the buffer zones is one that's been done certain places, but it's really not recommended. And then if the purpose is to kind of restrict youth access, they basically just go outside of the 500 feet and get it anyway, because usually they get it from social sources anyway, currently. Another thing is the adult-only tobacco shop exemptions. There's certain stores that, certain cities, what they did is that they said, for example, in Oakland, they restricted sales of flavored tobacco to adult-only shops, where the majority of their sales were 75% from revenue from tobacco products. The problem with this approach is that unless the new law states that you can't have any more other than the shops that were grandfathered in, what they did is the stores just spent money to get into the fit into the restriction. And so, for example, in Oakland, when they passed the law in July 2017, they actually had 3 shops that qualified, but currently they have 45 or more because the different stores just adjusted to what the ordinance did.
Patrick, it's important to note, and you may have mentioned this if you have, excuse me, that we're of course aware of the health concerns and the real challenges here, but this is also against the backdrop of some very aggressive advertising to young people, right?
Right.
That we're working against. I mean, some fairly high-end online advertising, social media advertising, targeting.
Right, and that's the thing is that, most high school students that use it and that high increase, they use social media, and it's been promoted in a lot of ways as far, especially, and they think that a lot of it is because of the flavoring. That's why they think that if you restrict the flavors, then that actually by itself would help a lot. One other type of restriction they use is restrictions by product or flavor type. In addition, and the problem with that part is that, for example, Massachusetts prohibited e-cigarettes that had flavor and other tobacco products, but exempted menthol. Other places they exempted flavors, but they didn't allow menthol. So what is actually recommended is that if you do it, that you actually restrict all flavors for products for a couple of reasons. One, it makes it more difficult for enforcement when you have to decide determine what flavor is what for enforcement. And the other, if you allow certain flavors, such as Maine, they allowed menthol, clove, coffee, nut, and pepper flavors. If your purpose is to make youth less likely to buy them, if you accept certain flavors, that kind of defeats the purpose. So what is the recommended sale is the comprehensive sales ban. So that's what is most people recommend. And in the last couple of years, several cities, including San Francisco, have passed laws prohibiting the sale of all flavored tobacco, including menthol cigarettes, anywhere in the city. And it's believed that this is the best approach for 2 reasons. One, it has the greatest health impact. 2, many cities have a large number of adult-only tobacco retailers, so products can still be widely available with that exception. And also, as described, as I said before, it's easier to enforce when you know that all flavors basically will be restricted. And this is probably more related to the smoke-free part, which we already have a smoke-free ordinance, but it doesn't deal with vaping or alternative types of products, such as e-cigarettes. And some of the health consequences that the 2006 Surgeon General reported said that secondhand smoke exposure causes disease and premature death in children and adults who do not smoke. Children exposed to secondhand smoke are at an increased risk for sudden infant death syndrome, acute respiratory problems, ear infections, asthma attacks, and parents that smoke cause respiratory symptoms and slow lung growth in their children.
Patrick, is that the same for e-cigarettes?
It is. Well, the difference, basically the difference between the e-cigarettes is that the particles are smaller, but they still exist. So nicotine, e-cigarettes still contain nicotine and other chemicals that cigarettes do. It's just that the particles are smaller, and even though you don't smell them, they're still present. So they cause the same types of issues, and actually in some cases they're more concentrated than they are in regular cigarettes. The Attorney General also said that exposure of adults to secondhand smoke can immediately have adverse effects on the cardiovascular system and cause coronary heart disease and lung cancer. And they said that there is no risk-free level of exposure to secondhand smoke. So anywhere where you can be exposed to, there's a risk to you, even if it's limited. And the Attorney General also said that even with, so for example, there were restaurants that had areas, they had designated areas, they said that basically doesn't work because the particles actually travel if it's in that enclosed space or even outside. And they said that basically establishing smoke-free workplaces is the only effective way to ensure that the secondhand smoke exposure doesn't occur in the workplace, because even when you have ventilation and other air cleaning technologies, they can't control exposure to the secondhand smoke. And evidence from peer-reviewed studies show that smoke-free policies and laws do not have an adverse effect, economic effect on the hospitality industry. And actually, they've shown that in certain places, it actually went up after they put those policies in place. And there's some more Attorney General reports that says that secondhand smoke exposure causes problems to non-smokers, and in the 2014 report stated that since the 1964 Surgeon General report, 2.5 million non-smokers have died from diseases caused by tobacco smoke. And the National Cancer Institute determined that approximately 53,000 Americans die early because of secondhand smoke. For us in Columbia, since we already have a smoke-free ordinance, what we probably would need to do is expand the smoke-free law to include electronic cigarettes in the existing law, make parks tobacco-free, and we could also include outdoor dining areas in the smoke-free law. So those are some options that we could do here in Columbia, since we already have a smoke-free law. That but we don't have the electronic cigarettes, because when it was passed in 2006, that wasn't a big issue. So we basically need to update our law as far as the smoke-free part to take into account the electronic or the vaping, and we can expand it to parks to make those tobacco-free as well as the outdoor dining. Because right now, it's just the indoor dining parts, not the outdoor.
Patrick, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I guess my concern would be perhaps being more specific with the e-cigarettes and sort of embellishing that into the 2006 ordinance. I think for me, it would certainly be helpful not only to include e-cigarettes, but I think snuff and chewing tobacco. I don't particularly know whether or not, I think we just put more teeth in it. Because if you're outside and smoking an e-cigarette, or you're not doing it, you're chewing tobacco, you're spitting all over the place. I think what I would like to see is us to put a little bit more teeth in that and specify chewing tobacco and snuff
Right. And what we could do is in our definitions, where I had up there as far as the alternative nicotine products, that includes e-cigarettes, snuff, and all those different types. So if that's what the council would want, we could put that in there in general.
Maybe I'm just confused what we're trying to do. So we went through two different things here.
Right. Two different things.
What is, I mean, I thought we were trying to update to add things, so I guess I was a little confused on the license because
what I asked-
the license got a little, I think, I mean, there were a lot of things when I looked at those options, and I think there are gonna be a lot of people upset
Now,
in
I
that
just
license
asked,
world. When you start, you know, you're talking about regulating everything from papers to chewing tobacco.
I just asked, if we could find out if we had the ability to do a local licensing ordinance. If we did one, and it's up for debate, but if we did one, that money could be used to go back into our health-related, programs or other things. So, this was actually about a year ago, and I haven't brought it forward, but since we were doing this, I asked Patrick if you would present that. So I think I think we need to discuss it. I mean, I do think there will be a lot of people who will not want it. So it's not something that we could do overnight, but I think we need to discuss it. For a
But are
revenue source.
we looking at trying to create a license so a convenience store would have to pay a separate license like they do for
Right.
beer and wine so that we could regulate it? Is that essentially what we would try to do? But we're not trying to prohibit, I get public places with, you know, our biggest problem with the smoking ban at this point is that we push people out into the streets and into the doorways, which is still a problem, I think.
Of course, 'cause you walk
You know,
in
at the end of the day, you know, it worked out for everybody, you know. You know, there were some places, people went to West Columbia and other places to smoke for a while, but now it's become pretty common. You notice the difference. I wasn't for the smoking ban at first because I didn't understand the effects, but what we're seeing now, I mean, the biggest challenge we have is the doorways, but adding this makes all the sense in the world. I mean, I think 100% that. I think looking at the license, I want to understand what that means. If we're trying to issue a license so we can regulate and be able to enforce underage sales and things like that, I think that makes sense. But if we're going in, because when you had that one page with all the options, I mean, we were
Right.
basically like.
Those are
managing-
options. Those
Yeah, and I
are
think-
things we don't have to do all of those
I just wanted to
things,
say what
but
all
those
our
are what
options
you
were.
those are things you can do.
It would be up to us to decide what we want to do, but yes, that would be the thing, so that we would have some mechanism for enforcement.
So what do we do now for enforcement? So let's say a convenience store, we catch them selling jewels to underage kids. I mean, blatantly. What is it now? What is it? Just a fine, a misdemeanor? How, if we do this, how does that?
How do you enforce it?
Yeah, well, how do we enforce it, or how do we make it enforceable so that it truly creates what we're trying to do, which is a barrier for kids getting, I mean, look, let's face it, if somebody wants it, they're gonna find a way to get it, but why just make it as hard as possible?
Right. Well, the thing is, we can't do any criminal. Like, one thing is legally, it has to be like a fine or something civil. It can't be criminal because that would be against the law. We do have the option.
$5 fine now.
But if it, now correct me, by doing something civil but making the penalties higher, actually is better for us, because if it's criminal, it could sit in court forever, and, you know, people keep delaying this and that, right?
Right.
Mr. Duval, and Mr. Davis.
What I had hoped to do with this discussion is to go through the model ordinance that I sent you a month ago and then again this week, and look at the provisions, starting with the definitions. I think we can skip over the first 4 pages, which are whereases, and they're good for court cases. But if we just skip to the meat of it and talk about the definitions, it would, I think, help us solve the problem of electronic cigarettes, vaping. Also, it will take care of some of the loopholes in the current smoking ordinance that we have, and it will take care of the people standing in the hallways, because we can set up a buffer around the building. Right. They'd have to go 25 feet. I know that Palmetto Health, for instance, has it their whole campus is smoke-free now. 2006, when we passed that, it would have been unheard of to have that huge area.
Have you ridden by Richland Memorial where they're sitting out there in the bus thing?
Yeah.
And their scrubs sucking the Larry Weiss's air out of that cigarette.
They're making it hard.
Even that at some point becomes acceptable. When I was reading this, in my mind, I thought, in terms of an easy way and a fast way to get to where I think both of you wanted to go. This is almost our smoking ordinance. It's basically an overlay.
That's right.
That's all you have to do. Now, one or two wordings in there you can play with, but I think the tobacco ordinance for Columbia is a good one. It took some time to get the final product.
And it's very close to what's the model.
Right. If that's where we want to go, I don't see you really trying to reinvent it. It's an overlay there, and then you can just
Right, and I think that part can be quickly adjusted,
Right.
so it wouldn't take a long time to adjust what we already have to add the electronic cigarettes or any other changes we want to make.
Well, if we're gonna overlay, then let's talk about some of the elements of the model ordinance that Patrick has not hit on right yet. I think the definitions area would be.
Right, that's one thing that would have to be changed is the
All of
definitions.
the definitions
Right.
would be
Yes.
good. But then you get into regulating city-owned facilities. You mentioned parks. There may
Right.
be other city-owned facilities that we would like to.
Right, there, if you wanted to go there, we could do that as well.
Prohibit smoking in enclosed public places. Does our current ordinance go as far as this one? I think we probably do. Aquariums, libraries, museums, bars, areas available to the general public and businesses for nonprofit nonprofit entities patronized by the public, including but not limited to banks, laundromats, professional offices, and retail services. We pretty well do that. Bars,
Bad
bingo,
bus shelters.
child care and adult care facilities, elevators, gambling facilities, healthcare facilities, hotels and motels.
Right.
You can add all that in, and there's a whole list of things that pretty well track what we have now.
Right.
How about prohibiting smoking in private clubs? We don't do that now.
You can't. I don't think you can legally, can you, in a private club?
That was a
We have
stickler,
it.
as I
Yeah,
recall,
yeah, the
when we were
last
trying to do it, so.
So leave off private clubs, residential facilities that would be under the healthcare. All private and semi-private rooms in nursing homes, all hotels and motel guest rooms.
What page are you
I'm on page 9 of the model.
on? Okay.
I would go back to the outdoor piece.
Yeah.
Parks.
Yeah. The next one here is outdoor places. And this is where Daniel's thing would come in, within a reasonable distance of, and they recommend between 15 and 25 feet of outside entrances, operable windows and ventilation systems with enclosed areas where smoking is prohibited. All outdoor property that is adjacent to buildings owned, leased, or operated by the city. Within 15 to 25 feet of outdoor seating or serving areas of restaurants, bars, and gambling facilities. We don't have any outdoor
Not
shopping.
yet. Parimutuel betting's coming.
Well, maybe we need to put it in there to be ready for them. Outdoor shopping malls and including parking structures. Outdoor arenas, stadiums, and amphitheaters. Outdoor recreational areas, including parking lots. Within 15 to 25 feet of outdoor playgrounds, 15 to 25 feet of outdoor public events. How about public events? That would include Soda City and things like that. It would include.
Right.
Let me say a couple of things, and I'm gonna walk out, and I'll be back after a while, and hopefully the place is still standing.
She runs a tight ship.
let's, as Daniel intimated, let's focus on exactly what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And then let's come up with a proposal that is comprehensive but tightly structured to help us achieve that goal. I mean, so we've got some great stuff. And I want to make a point. We've got some great folks in the room from the American Heart Association, from the American Cancer Society, South Carolina Tobacco Free Collaboratives. We got some subject matter experts in the room. I'd say, as needed, let's lean on them and get their input. But obviously, I know a number of us have their content here. But let's make sure we use them. But let's obviously acknowledge a couple of facts. Things have changed dramatically since the city passed this last ordinance, and we need to adjust accordingly.
Sure.
We've watched new products come onto the market, both tobacco products and tobacco-free products, and we need to address that in some way.
Sure.
But let's think about how we can do it in a way and I think we need to talk to industry. Let's hear what the industry has to say. I think dialogue is important, but remain centrally focused on what our goal is here. But let's do this. Let's not take the buckshot kind of approach. Back to pheasants and pigeons and everything else Ed was talking about earlier. Let's just make sure we make it tight.
I agree. I think we need to stay focused on, because it is a big subject to talk about, and there's a lot of things to do. Two things that I'd like to mention. Number one, do we have any idea how many citations been issued for people who smoking around restaurants or in a public park or anything? Because it's, right now it's a smoke-free public places, like in the restaurants. So any idea if we ever even issued a citation to anybody? Number one. Number two, as I am in the restaurant business, or used to, you're not going to be able to find employees who's not smokers. And if you look, and I don't want to say 90% of restaurants, but there's a good number of restaurants where the cooks or the staff is right at the back door smoking like a chimney. Of course, I don't want to say I never allowed that to my employees, but I never did. But I think there's something that we need to control into how we can enforce that. And number three, and maybe we can, I'm not sure if the schools, we're talking about young children and kids that are not, we don't want them to have the ability to buy e-cigarettes or nicotine and stuff like that. Is there any way we can talk to the school board that if any child has any e-cigarettes or any cigarette product in their bookcase or their backpack, there will be disciplinary actions?
I'm pretty sure that's already the case.
School already, Richland One already has that.
Not e-cigarettes.
They have it on e-cigarettes, I believe that Richland.
No. Yeah, not my research I did. So that's something we need to encourage. I mean, if we're gonna make it a full ordinance that we're gonna look out of children
We gotta
and
increase
youth,
the
is we
penalties.
need, well,
$25.
I think the penalties, it's controlled by the business license. If and we can, I guess, mirror it or follow whatever we have, or rental or landlord. If you have so many points, so many tickets, you're not going to be able to get a business license to sell tobacco or e-cigarettes. I think that's something that we can discuss in the later, but I think for us to make this effective, we need to make sure that we pinpoint, our young children is the main focus here. So we need to make sure we can control that at schools as well as anywhere else.
Just as many teenagers, one of the things I don't want us to forget, this is just not about the smoking piece. What about the chewing and the snuff piece? I mean, it is just as dangerous and as cancerous as nicotine in your body, in your lungs, causing some real devastating.
Reverend, I think the argument here is not what you can do harm to your body, it's what surrounds you. Secondhand smoke, it's a problem for people that it's innocence, they're just sitting in a park, and so is e-cigarettes, but
if we're gonna look at this thing comprehensively, we can't take one without the other. It is just, and I don't smoke nor dip or chew. But I do know folk that do that in open events. I've seen them. And it's just as dangerous. So I don't want us to negate one part of this and not take this piece on comprehensively. And it's smoke, tobacco, chewing tobacco, e-cigarettes, the whole 9 yards. And if we're gonna approach it that way, I think we need to have some real conversation, because when we talk about this issue, we primarily focus on the smoking piece and not on the piece that I think is the forgotten giant that has awakened. We got kids in school now with the little pan in their pocket, the little round.
Can.
Yeah, whatever that tobacco is called. Oh, yeah, I mean, it's.
Called dipping.
Dipping. I mean, gee whiz, it's just as bad. So I hope in our conversation, that we comprehensively look holistically at the whole issue of smoking, e-cigarettes, snuffing, and dipping, chewing, whatever.
Snuffing and dipping would be acceptable because it's a derivative of the tobacco
It's
that
a
we're talking
derivative.
about. So you
But
just
Go back
include
to
it, yeah.
Howard going through the model
Right.
and some of the things that he wanted to point out, and then
We're about
and
through.
those things that Ed is bringing up, if there's an area to add that if it's not already addressed,
Yeah.
we can discuss that.
And I've made some notes here.
Put it in the
And I appreciate that, Hal, but my point is this. If you've ever visited somebody with esophageal cancer because of chewing tobacco, have you ever seen somebody whose jaw has been permanently, surgically taken out because of esophageal cancer? It's, you see somebody in the hospital, and it's not only earth-shaking, but it ought to be revelatory for those persons who are doing that. So I think with what Howard is going to sort of lay out on the table, I think it's important that we look at this thing comprehensively, and that we look at the whole thing about tobacco addiction and what it does to your body, whether it's tobacco, whether it's e-cigarettes, and the vapor that comes out of that.
Just, Richland One updated the policy last year, they're gonna get it to us, but they did include some cigarettes.
Did they?
You wanna ask them about
Yeah,
Dipping?
snuffing.
We can see how that would fit into the ordinance. It is a tobacco product.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a
Yeah.
tobacco
So
product.
I don't see a problem
And
with it.
kids are doing it. Look, there are kids, teenagers, who have these little round snuff cans in their jean pockets.
Baseball.
Huh? And it's Copenhagen or something.
Skol, brother.
Skol, brother. And they dip.
I have
and
seen that.
They
Yeah.
They dip and chew. And they will immediately say, I don't smoke,
Because
but
they
I'm
don't
still
know.
getting the same amount of
Yeah.
nicotine in my body.
It's part of the education process.
That's right.
They've not
So
gone
Howard,
through
you
that.
wanna go back to the?
Most of all the guts have already been gone through. There are other things about where smoking is not regulated, which would be in private residences and areas like that. There's a section here about declaration of establishment of outdoor areas as non-smoking.
Would that mean like if there was a special event? What would that mean?
This lets the owner of the establishment declare that the entire establishment, indoors and out, as a non-smoking place. Posting of signs about the policy of non-smoking, removable ashtrays. I really think that if the council would let maybe Tamika and I work with Patrick, we could draw up a proposed amendment to our existing ordinance and then bring a document back to you to go through piece by piece, using this model, using the model that you've got, and using what Patrick's got as the city ordinance. We can come up with a proposal that we can put on the table for the council.
I can live with that.
Yeah, I think we can do that. I think that, I guess what you need to think about is, like, for example, if you do restrict as far as, say, outdoor events, that does affect things like Soda City and other events. So that's, up to council whether they want to take that stance or not.
So
We can
that's
do
why-
an ordinance either way.
What about the county fair?
Right, that as well.
I'm asking, now that is a public event.
Right.
So is it considered private?
Why don't you just make the whole city smoke-free?
I mean, I'm just asking the question.
But,
I
but
mean,
I don't
has
know
that
about
been
the-
done before? I mean,
You
just
can,
curious.
if you're not, if you're gonna
Yeah,
allow
but-
private clubs to be exempt.
Yeah, but they're indoor,
Well, but
It would certainly be helpful to Tamika and Howard and Patrick.
just give it your best shot and come back.
We can bring you a document and let you look at something as a proposal rather than a theory.
But make it things that, I mean, there's no reason to put 12 pages of stuff that we can't enforce and do.
Right.
And, I mean, that's just,
Yeah, I think we have a good feel for what may or may not fly.
yeah.
Is that all right? Okay.
And take your time. Let's get feedback from everybody.
Well, I think after we get
You will.
document,
It's coming.
then we have, public
Public
hearings
hearing.
on the document.
Once we get something, that's what we did with the original ban.
It's
I
coming.
ju- I just, yeah, I mean, I even heard some of from people who were, against the original ban, and they're like, at this point, my business is normalized.
We got through it.
Yeah, just
Well-
move forward.
Well, I think the other thing is there needs to be, because there has been that aggressive push towards youth and, having the flavored jewels and all that stuff. I mean, people just don't know how bad it still is. I mean, I saw a Facebook conversation where everybody was blaming Howard for wasting the city's time, and I had to tell. Yeah, but I had to.
Oh, I thought you were gonna tell me blaming Howard for jeweling.
What he was or wasn't?
But the conversation
dueling
was.
or
Hey, he was in his house.
But the conversation was like, this isn't harmful, and I'm thinking.
It is.
It is harmful.
Yeah, but I mean, I think people have a misperception that, it's a fake cigarette, it's not harmful. And so I think part of this discussion hopefully will elevate the awareness
Yeah.
that these are harmful to people.
I remember I was at some folks' house, family party on Friday night, and there was a difference in the age group. The younger folks all went into a room, and they had it was a hookah. First time I ever saw that stuff in most.
You sure they were
And I
smoking
got-
shahish and not wild parsley?
I have no idea because I got the hell out of it because I didn't know what it was.
Oh, you weren't there?
I looked in the room and saw it. So I'm just
You
saying,
didn't
there
inhale,
are
did
some
you?
folks that, No.
Didn't inhale, did you?
That was the sweet. We were in Egypt, and they had everybody try the hookah. This is the sweet. I mean, I couldn't imagine smoking that stuff.
Well,
So follow up.
we will work with Patrick to come up with a document that we will bring back to council.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
My boss used to say, "Take 5, smoke 1."
It's Copenhagen. So, our next item, item 2. Capital projects for general fund and special revenue. Ms. Missy Kaufman, Director of Budget and Program Management.
American Cancer Society and
I'm gonna pass them out too, for folks that want them.
Howard's running for mayor.
Moore's gonna put this up on the screen, but I've also got hard copies for anybody who's in like a
Yes.
party.
Thank you, thank you.
your colors today. They're gonna be hard to live with for the next year.
The next year, 81 was still hard to live with.
They're gonna win again next year.
All right, so we got that out of the way. Good afternoon. As we continue our discussions for the FY 19-20 budget, we are bringing different discussion items to City Council. And one of the items that we've talked a lot about in recent years, and as we move forward in with next year's discussions, is our reoccurring conversations about funding general capital projects, or projects that are typically going to be funding and supportive of the general fund. That would be city facilities, primarily our parks, our fire stations, our police stations, our city buildings, and other city facilities. We've included on this list, or what we also talk about, is some of those other items that will be for discussion, some other big commitments or some other wish list type items that we've talked about ever in recent years as well. So what, I'm sorry, I forgot the one with the clicker. So the list, what you've got before you is a PowerPoint, but also too, you've got attached a list of projects. This is a list of projects that really we would have provided to you during last year's budget discussions, which would have been the FY 18-19 budget request. These are projects that are still not funded, or if they have funding, they have only partial funding. The FY 19-20 project list will look very similar, I'm sure. Most of these projects have been submitted or been brought forward on a reoccurring basis.
You're talking about the project listed.
Yes.
These are not funded or okay.
Correct. These are not funded. If they are funded, they have partial funding. There's a column,
Yeah,
and there
I
is a
was gonna
column.
say, the one that says approved funding.
Right, so there's a column in
Not much to read.
Yes, I think it's a very important point. So when we're looking at these, remember, this is not necessarily all approved funding, other than what's in that column.
Not much is.
It is looking ahead to the future of the needs that we've identified in our estimated costs.
Right. So we bring these projects really kind of every year, and some of these, because they're, unless we identify funding, or unless the project is determined to no longer be needed, it stays on our capital improvement project CIP, or our project list, until we do get funding. We also, some on this list may really teeter more on operating costs, because they are scheduled or funding that we would want to see on a reoccurring basis to be able to put things in a schedule that would allow us to fund an amount every year to get us towards to be able to help maintain, whether it's our park systems, whether it's our HVAC units at our city facilities, those type of things like that. And then, of course, there's big projects that are construction type projects. Oh, yes, sir, I'm sorry. So we can go through some of the projects. Part of what we're wanting to talk about today, and what Jeff will get into more directly, is talking about some approaches that we may take with identifying different mechanisms of possibly funding. But that's not without being said that a lot of that mechanism for funding will be based on, one, whether it's a debt capacity issue of the general fund and our ability to issue debt, but in more so, and probably even more importantly, is the general fund's ability to fund debt, to which there's very little, if much, room at all right now in the general fund to be able to add additional debt or to fund from cash. Historically, the city has been able to fund capital projects from cash. It's been a long time since we've sort of been at that reoccurring type of basis, but there is options for, obviously, some funding discussions. So what we'll talk about now is leading into some of talking about some of those different funding options. But also too, you know, as we go into that, there'll be a need to sort of prioritize some of these projects. So with that, are there any questions, first off, about sort of the list or how we've compiled the list or what's expected about the list before Jeff talks
I
about?
have a question and a list, but not necessarily this list, but I know we've issued a couple of press releases that the first storm drain bond has been issued. I'd like to have the CIP list that for that bond that qualifies. You know what I'm saying? So the list of projects that we issued that bond to complete, I'd love to have that list emailed to me or shared with me if you can.
Certainly, that's a good point, too. I want to point out, we started out, I mentioned this in the front end, but to make sure we're clear, this list of projects is just general capital projects, not any of our utility funds, so nothing that would be funded with water, sewer, and stormwater. But to your point, yes, we can get that list.
Okay.
That is available, and we'd also we'll bring up water and sewer, stormwater capital projects.
I'd love to get that storm drain list, CIP list, if I can, ASAP, so I can communicate that with the people who's been asking me. Number one. Number two, on this list that you have with us, some of these could be just regular maintenance. For example, police headquarters, looks like remove existing wallpaper, blah, blah, blah. I mean, why is that a capital CIP list? I mean, a lot of that is maintenance.
And I actually touched on some of that too in the points, is that some of these items are really, they are capital, they may be capital cost, but they're really, could be more maintaining in terms of maintenance, in terms of operating. It could be operating capital instead of a CIP type of capital where we're looking for things on our, that would be part of our
I would love for
capital
y'all
improvement
to
project.
maybe put your heads together and find out, you know, maybe eliminate some of these maintenance type kind of CIP project or projects, and then maybe concentrate on the actual, you know, to me, when I look at CIP project, I'm like an actual project, like,
True, and mostly what we would do in terms of, Jeff will probably speak to this too, when we do get into, most of what we're talking about is gonna end up being some kind of financing, funding, or
Right.
options. And if we do, we would more than likely put a project in there versus a reoccurring, you know, some of these,
okay.
they're more upgrades than they are improvements.
Yeah, and that's the only thing that I can, you know, see right away. You know, some of these, like I said, they're maintenance, some of them are not. But I would love, I mean, when you look at the number on requested 18-19 or 19-20, I mean, you're looking at 124 million, 36 million, I mean.
So let me add.
But let's, we've,
You have a very good point on that. In the past, years past, and this is before I was here, a lot of these that we're calling maintenance/capital, we might have had in our regular budgets, we might have paid through various functions. Today,
We've lost our
we
audience.
don't necessarily
No, let's
have
think of the
that.
same thing. We've got-
But I think that's something that we can work through the budget to get it worked out through a maintenance.
Y'all wanna hear Missy's presentation?
or the side questions maybe being answered as Jeff and I talk.
No,
I
do
wanna
y'all
hear
have any
it.
questions? Okay.
The
Mr.
hammer
Davis?
will drop in March. We don't have to worry about it till then.
No, I had a question,
know.
because Daniel and I asked a couple of times about the municipal court renovations, and I see it's on here,
Yeah.
and it's not funded, but I honestly think, I mean, you would know more, I think this is grossly low.
Yeah.
200,000.
Have you been down there lately?
So, yeah, we had asked if we could get, just, an evaluation of the court and see what that would look like.
I thought we're buying the building next door.
Wait.
What
The
building?
courthouse?
What happened to that? What building?
This courthouse? That one probably costs even more to do something with. Anyway, but if. you
We're
could do
talking about
that-
the municipal courthouse,
Yeah,
the
right.
cities, yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Davis? You had a question?
Well, I don't know. Why don't you go through your presentation first? I'll just.
She was finished. That's what I was asking the job.
Oh, yes. Just.
I guess the highlights would be is that this is a rolling list of projects every year that
Right.
that have not been funded. And if they do have funding, they are only partially funded. We will update this list as we get through the budget process for 1920. More than likely, these will be the same projects on there. And as Mr. Baddour pointed out, and some of these projects are more maintenance type of things, or things that we would not put in a financing plan, meaning we would borrow money, most likely, but they are things that at the end of the day, need to be addressed.
Yeah,
Whether it's through the
I
operating
think
budget or
just like
capital.
a number of them, and you're correct, the maintenance needs in other areas. I'm just trying to understand two things. The Keenan House, it's been there for a while. That's something that we own. It's a city-owned building.
Right, all of these are city-owned facilities. He's right.
Can I ask for an explanation of the two columns for Hyatt Park?
So one column is approved funding. That's funding that's been identified as part of the funding project. Then going forward has been what's requested and how much is needed. This is really a 5-year CIP. So it's what's anticipated either, if it were approved to be year 1, 5-year.
What is, where?
Phase 1.
This is what has been distributed? That's where they are now. And the phase 2 shows 1.1. And that's where we are now.
So approved the only funding that's approved is the first column, approved column. There is no funding identified for any future projects at this time. We haven't gotten to that point in the budget discussions either.
Okay, I would ask that we take into consideration the public commitment we made to the community when they were upstairs, I'm sorry. And I can't go to a meeting without that. That's on the agenda every month.
Which park are you talking about?
Hyatt. So we, as we move towards D-Day, Missy, I would be depending on you to kind of, do your swagger. Thank you.
Sure.
Since we're trying to get our parks in order, Southeast Park, we've been asking for a building for like ages, and I thought we allocated like $600,000 at one time to build that building, and now it's gone and it's 180.
180 is requested, that's not even approved. But I did think we approved something.
We did, but then it was reallocated. There was some reallocations done.
Oh, Lordy.
Because it wasn't shovel-ready?
Did you give it to Hyatt Park? The other
We
park
funded
building.
I think we funded SCBA.
The other,
for
I'm
fire
just kidding.
department.
The other park building we're talking about, the Cedar Terrace area,
Hampton Park?
Hampton Park.
Hampton Park is in process. I should add too, this does not reflect projects that are actually underway.
What do you mean by in process?
It's underway. It's funded and under construction.
Oh, it is?
underway. It was funded several
Oh,
years ago.
I need to go by that, okay. Cool.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I know, we approved it a long time ago, but
You did.
they reallocate everything to Hyatt Park, so you just want to make sure that.
That's a good point.
Fire station there in
Fire Station 2.
Where's that?
Right there, that's the third thing, third one.
Okay.
Municipal Court?
That needs to go to the top.
Where?
I'm glad you said that, Al, because that has been a tremendous, that fire station over there is in bad shape.
Which one?
Fire Station 2, Olympia.
Yeah, we need to find a new building.
Yeah, it's in bad shape.
I thought we already dealt with that.
No, they didn't do anything. We need to get together on that, Reverend.
You got this right here. Upgrade all station. Missy, what is that upgrade all station?
Female fighters.
There are, yes.
Bathroom?
Well, it's a different facility, yes.
Oh, okay.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for
Question.
Ms. Kaufman?
What are the geo capacity?
That's part of what Jeff is getting ready to talk about with regards to
So-
funding options and financing.
So part of the purpose of this is to take a look so we can all see the magnitude of the very many different projects going on. So a lot of times we get focused on a project and that becomes the focus, but we also have all these other projects sitting out there. So part of this purpose is just.
One of the slogans of the Swedish
It picked up on the microphone.
Having a party up there with that?
Just because you're close to them.
I guess, I don't know.
Pretty good quality there. So
Glad I didn't have disco.
the things we will be looking at is we're going to attempt to make a look longer term, not just in the upcoming budget year, but how do we start thinking about these different projects that we know each of y'all have different projects, different parks, different areas of the city, different whatever they are going on. So we need to be thinking about, we can't do them all in 1 year, but what do we need to do to start accomplishing these over the, say, we pick 5 years right now to put this out. Some things could be a little longer, some things could be a little shorter, but all of it obviously costs resources. So we will take a look at just within our general fund, because that's one of the things, remember, the majority of this list, unfortunately, is our general fund. You know, we come to y'all each year for 120 million on water and sewer. We usually pay for 80% of that through a bond issue and 20% of that, roughly to 25% through operating cash. General fund's slightly different. Probably the one funding source that is the most stressed, but yet provides the most amount of resources. So our options also are very much more limited, and debt issuance, things like that. You know, you often hear us talk about our 8% debt limit. You know, that's pretty limited. To just issue geo bonds, our geo debt limit, and this doesn't mean the revenue is there for it in the current budget, but just if we were to issue additional debt is not going to be more than 15 million as of this past June. As assessment and property values go up, that grows, but, yes, sir.
Jeff, the limitation on the debt limit does not apply if we have a referendum and it's approved by referendum.
That is
If we were to go, you're gonna pick a number, let's use $100 million. If we went out for a referendum on $100 million worth of park restoration projects, to include Hyatt Park and others, and it was approved, does the general fund have the capacity of cash flow to pay the debt on that?
That's the other part of the conversation.
The general fund would not. Staff and I and some of our outside experts have taken a look at where our general fund payment along with our lease, because remember, we have two big funding items between our general obligation debt. We've used that in the past. Part of that was for Bull Street infrastructure. A large part of that was for our rolling capital. Some of that is paying off, but that rolling capital is being replaced with our lease purchase loans that we do each year. That's about $7 to $8 million per year. That has a cost to that $8 million each year of only roughly a little over 1.2 million over 7 years. But when you have 7 years of it stacked on top of each other, we've stacked that on and we've rolled that forward to take a look to see, are we paying off future debt that we could then roll into something else? And right now I can tell you all the answer is no. So we will need to find new revenues in order to issue new debt.
Even if it was not against our limit.
Right, even if it's not against the limit. So if we have a referendum, there really would be to issue debt, whether it's 10 million, 50 million, or 100 million, there is a cost to that. So that would be, that'd be a change to the millage rates.
Yeah, but if you start doing that, I mean, that's what the school board is doing. They issued bonds and referendums back and forth, and now can't compete.
So, and those are, that's not a discussion we'll obviously be able to answer today, but it is something for us to consider. The other thing is we have had discussions, I believe Missy and the manager talked 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks, and probably even 6 weeks ago. The audit's just about complete. There will be a small amount of surplus money, and annually when there is surplus money, in years, many years ago, that would be, we would take some of those millions to utilize for different projects. So I'm not promising that that's going to be out there. That's not, that's not the best possible way of planning. Right now, it's kind of what we're stuck with. But we do want to try to work out a plan. We've talked about geo bonds. Depending on the projects, other things to consider are hospitality bonds. I know there's a whole lot of difference, a range of opinion on how to utilize hospitality tax funds and whether it's future growth and how it should be utilized, whether it goes to the groups or whether it goes to a big project. Those are things to consider. I'm not tossing them out there today to say that we need to do that, but those are things to consider. Other things to take a look at would be accommodations tax, and there's two types. There's tourism development fee. That is what us, Richland County and Lexington County, have utilized for the last roughly 15 years, that we use that to pay for the convention center. The conventions, and with that, that bond actually pays off in 2022. I think it's December 2022. So we have had, and I believe one of the items, do we have a convention center on here, expansion? That's
Yeah.
one of the items to think about. Are we going to expand the convention center in the future? Do we continue to use then that resource of the tourism development fee for that? The other item would be a state accommodations tax, which is roughly the same. It's just tourism development fee is your local accommodation. State accommodations tax still is the heads in the beds, but it comes to us through the state's collection of it. Currently, we utilize most of that, a large percent of that, for the marketing for convention center, and then there is about 15% of that amount also goes to Lake Murray Visitor Center. Ms. Devine mentioned this past year about taking a look at utilizing the growth of that could possibly be used for some of our expansion or maybe other needs. So these are the different items that we'll be looking at. I bring them to y'all's attention. My door is always open, my ear is always listening, so if y'all have thoughts on some things as well, don't hesitate to toss them my way. I will say, as a state, we have very restrictive state laws on how we can spend different funds and how we can bond different funds. So I do meet often with vendors from outside of our state and talk about how they do things in Nashville or other communities, and they usually are very nice, but a lot of times we have issues implementing those similar type programs.
What's the guesstimate again on the convention center?
20 million,
Expansion? What's
20
the-
million,
20 million.
Oh,
20 million. But that's on the parking deck. The expansion center is not listed.
So, to briefly touch on the convention center, there's two things that would have to occur. The expansion of the center itself is anywhere from 35 million to 50 million, depending upon the scope of it, and that's an estimate. It is a very large expansion, though, it's not necessarily putting more, it's putting more actual space, not, I was gonna call it retail space, exhibit space out there, and it would be a substantial increase. That is really where the need is, would be for the exhibit space. However, the expansion of the center does go back, and it would be in that parking area that they currently have, which probably parks 300 to 400 people. So if an expansion occurs, you really need an additional parking deck associated with it to make up for that parking. So those are some of the things, as other development occurs in that area. Potentially, there's an opportunity for partnership with others to work on a parking deck in that area as well. Other items, I'm going to say the favorite word. Someone here is probably going to shoot me, but when we talk about general fund, we should talk about and realize and recognize installment purchase revenue bonds also are another mechanism that can be utilized. The advantage of an installment purchase revenue bond, though, is you can bond multiple revenue sources. So if you're doing a parking garage, you might have parking revenue, you may have tax revenue, or maybe some other revenue that you can use to make that payment. So those are just of the many items that are out there for us to consider.
I don't think we need to look at anything until we've addressed the parcels that aren't participating.
Yeah, I agree with you
At
100%.
the end of the day, we don't need to be feeing anybody, we don't need to be doing anything that's putting more burden on what we have until we've addressed that situation.
Make it even, fair.
If we could come up with a legal way to do that, it would make
There's several. We just need to stand up and do it.
Yep.
And that needs to be done
ASAP.
by July.
That's a big part of our discussion next week, right?
Well, I don't know, next week if that's a
Right.
big part of it.
Okay.
It probably can evolve into some of that discussion. However, that is still ongoing. We did meet and have some additional discussion this week, just talking about tax exempt properties, things that can be done, whether it's fees, whether it's through,
We just have to level the field
Right.
with, because the burden's getting put on to the small businesses and the homeowners. That's affecting our affordable housing. It's affecting businesses. I mean, you look at what somebody's paying today in CAM taxes and insurance. That's why those guys are here for the apartments and everything for incentive, because it's just, so I think until we've addressed that, we need to have that revenue, and then we can start talking about.
And I think there's enough heat or energy right now on this council to get that done, hopefully this year.
We should have addressed it 20 years ago, but the reality is we are where we are today, and so we need to address it now.
and let me add, staff is working on that based upon input pretty much from all of y'all. Everyone has slightly different opinions on which way we should go, but we are working on it.
Maybe you should go look at all of them. I mean, maybe you should take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of that, and make one, I mean, don't just get all your revenue sources from one idea. Get a little bit of revenue sources from 3 different ideas. No.
What I'm still looking for is that we come up with
That's been the excuse for 20 years.
I know, that's.
whatever our strategy
There's a
is going to
sweet
be.
spot in there.
But I'm still interested, though, in other municipalities, what some of the things they've done to solve that problem.
So
There are some areas where, it's out there, but I want to just know what else is out there.
We do look at.
Well,
Yeah, and I
look,
think she brought
the
that
the
forward.
problem is if you read, there was a great article in the Wall Street Journal about 2 months ago about Austin and how outrageous the fees and everything have gotten in Austin. And it's affecting people because they've tried to tax themselves out of this issue. Without really addressing the root of the problem.
Right, so-
Or part of the problem.
Exactly.
We got twofold. One, we have to have conversations with our colleagues down on Richland Street.
We know what our maximum is right now in terms of our ability to bring revenues in from property taxes. But we don't know, I guess there is some kind of a dollar value on what we think that we're missing out there. But the question in my mind is still, how do we do it? We haven't figured out a way yet what we're going to do based on what we think our strategy ought to be. But there are other cities that have been faced with the same problem, challenge, and they've done something, if not 100%. They're getting more than they were getting in the past because they figured out a way to make it make sense and a way to pitch it. And bottom line is everybody wins because for what we're not able to do because of a lack of revenues, then there are parts of the city or there are services or other innovations we want to do that go lacking because we don't have the dollars.
It's a three-prong. I mean, the reality is that's one little piece of it. The other ones, we got to encourage growth where we already have infrastructure so we don't have an increased cost, which then will bring more value, which helps balance it out. We unfortunately live in a double-edged sword community because without the nonprofits that are all here and the government and the university, we wouldn't have the growth that's around us. So you have to balance that. And so, by recruiting and filling those spaces, encouraging and making it easier for people to do business and get through the process, we're constantly adding layers of overlays and this and that, but yet this parcel doesn't have to be in it because that guy's special, but these people do, and this group wants us to do this and that. We gotta balance all
Everybody gets
that
treated the same.
so that we can grow.
Or you limit the exceptions. for good
Anything
reasons.
else, guys?
I think mostly we weren't expecting really to finish this discussion today as much as it is bringing forward. I think you're right in the sense of focusing on the revenue pieces. We are multitask oriented, so we know we have to be able to focus on many of these things at the same time. We just wanted to make sure we bring back as we're talking through these projects, sort of what direction we're going with our options for consideration.
And I think that we've been talking about this for years. I mean, we just need to take a stand and go for it.
We do, and the general fund is just a general, and if you may recall in multiple any budget discussions, general fund capital is the one item that we bring up that's not adequately funded. We have currently about $5 million in debt in general fund and about $3.4 million in lease purchase. So
3.4?
through about 3.4.
So you've got another
Currently, that's
7.5, 8 million available.
no.
That's what's currently.
That's what's budgeted. There's not, in terms of the capacity to fund it, that, we won't know that yet. But on top of that is the debt capacity. Lease isn't part of the the legal debt limit.
I thought the debt limit was 15 million. on the
There's
GL.
roughly capacity
is.
of 15 million, but that doesn't mean there's revenues to pay for
Oh,
that.
I got you.
Doesn't mean
I
there's-
got you.
You want to make sure that
got you.
we distinguish the difference.
Right.
Within state law, we would be allowed to issue that much more debt, but the current budget doesn't have revenue coming in to make that payment.
Or
Just because
expenses
you're
that we can
approved
just,
on $10,000 credit card borrowing limits, it doesn't mean you have money to make the
Still got to make
payments.
your monthly payment. You
Right.
have the rest of the
Exactly, same thing.
that's exactly where we are.
Really?
All right, is there a motion for executive session?
Madam Pro Tem, I would like to recommend, move that we go into executive session for receipt of legal advice related to matters covered by attorney-client privilege pursuant to 30-4-70A2, proposed Memorial Park, and discussion of negotiations, instance of proposed purchase of property pursuant to Code 70A2, Metro Wastewater Treatment Plant.
Second.
Ms. McCoffey, move the second. Madam Clerk?
Yes.
Aye.
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 Are we doing it here upstairs?
Go upstairs.